This is Mistress Sweet Pea, and welcome to another edition of my podcast. And I took a bit of a break because of the holiday, and now that the holidays are over, it's a new year, and I hope everyone has the best new year possible. Anyways, on that note, I hope everyone's well, and I know that lately we haven't been doing much talking with tech, but we are going to incorporate more of that in this year. And in fact, I believe 4 or 5 podcasts down the road, we're going to be talking more about tech, especially given the way things are today, technology-wise. So we will be touching on some tech topics soon. On that note, I would love nothing more than to give a shout out to my friend, Jimmy V. He is over at Radio Cobra Detroit. He is one of the crew members, and he does have an amazing voice. He is part of the Midnight Funk Revisited over at RadioCobraDetroit.com. His radio show is on Fridays and Sundays from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. I highly recommend checking it out. I listen to it every week, and I just love it. And I am a night owl, so I enjoyed it. I highly recommend checking him out. He is incredibly gifted and extremely smart, and his radio show just keeps me on my toes. So he's also on Instagram. You can check him out on Instagram at radio_Cobra_Detroit. He's also on TikTok. The symbol for that is at RadioCobraDetroit.com. He's also on YouTube, and that's Radio Cobra Detroit as well. And again, check him out. I highly recommend it. And Jimmy, if you're listening, peace out. Anyways, so tonight's conversation, let's all unwind and relax. And we're going to talk tonight about the musical genius, speaking of geniuses, Prince and the Revolutions, and how they came about. So we'll go ahead, get relaxed, get started. Grab your coffee, your tea, or whatever you are drinking. And let's just go ahead and get started on this. So I want everyone to just take it easy, relax, have your water like I am, and let's just, I feel like life is going so fast. Like we all need to just take a relax and breathe. Anyways, let's get started. So, Prince and the Revolution. So, Prince Rogers Nelson. He was born in Minneapolis back in 1958, and needless to say, he came from a musical family. Music was all around him. He had a dad. His father was a jazz pianist, and his mother was a jazz singer. So music was already in his family from the time he was born. But life wasn't always easy for him. As he got older, I think he was 9 or 10 when his parents split up. So he was moving between homes, and of course, it was hard on him, and it would be hard for any kid. So with that back and forth, going from one home to another, he sought refuge in music. Music was his muse, his escape. He was able to fight his demons through music, and he was, from what I've read and researched about him, he was amazing. So he started playing piano as a kid. He self-taught himself guitar and drums, and when he was in school, he met Andre Cymone, and together with Morris Day, they formed their own group called Grand Central, which later on they went to change the name to Champagne. Yes, that's right, it was Champagne. So they played at school events, local clubs. Again, they were minor, so they really weren't playing at bars and, just local PG venue type events. Prince never wanted formal lessons. He refused it. He said that he was self-taught. He learned by ear. He played his own instruments. He used to jam late into the night, playing instruments, teaching himself how to play instruments. Even though he was considered by his classmates as shy, he was one of those kids that kind of stood in the background and didn't want to be recognized, I guess, from what I've read. But he did work hard to try to stand out. So he was trying to find himself so he can find a way to stand out amongst his peers. And basically, music helped him to accomplish that. He started using flashy styles and tunes, and his talent, how he perceived himself and how he composed himself and carried himself he drew attention no matter what. So eventually that shyness, from what I've read, has diminished over time, but it was still in the back of him. He was still shy. So as a teenager, Prince spent most of his time at local studios. He was writing, practicing, and by the time he was 14, he was playing in bands. And again, music was his escape and his muse. At 19, he signed with Warner Brothers, and he was considered the youngest artist ever to be signed by Warner Brothers. And he also had full creative control. He basically had full reign, got to write and produce and record his own music. He focused more on the Minneapolis sound, which is a mix of funk, rock, synth pop, R&B, all in one. It was considered fresh, electronic, and like anything else that anyone's ever heard from coast to coast. But we will touch briefly on it for this podcast. But there will be another podcast where I will go more, divulge more into this concept of the Minneapolis sound. So Prince went on to Minneapolis Central High School. He was known as a serious musician and also a good basketball player. He stayed on the basketball team at first, but then by the time he hits 10th grade sophomore year, he just he put all of his energy and time into music, and he just quit the team. He spent hours in the school music room, band rehearsals. He took music classes, but he avoided, again, all formal training. He's been asked about, come, I can train you. Nope, he was not having it. He taught himself, and that was the best way for him. So he, again, took music classes. He preferred to listen to records and radio, and he learned by ear. And he also did a lot of experimentation with different instruments, created different sounds, and that helped him to write his music as well. After school and on weekends, he rehearsed with Andre and his band, with his friends. Sometimes they would play community centers, school dances. I mean, he learned a wide variety of ranges of genres, from funk, rock, pop music. He also, the one thing that I loved about Prince's music, and I'm sure a lot of people can attest to this, is that his music appealed to everyone. Black, white, brown, red, culture, doesn't matter. His music appealed to everyone from everywhere around the world. It didn't matter what race or ethnicity or anything. There was any one of his music, any one of his hits touched people in certain ways. And it didn't matter where you came from. And that's what I love about his music. And that's what he wanted. Prince wanted to appeal to everyone, not just a black audience or a white audience, everyone. And I love that. So, moving forward, Prince's life, as most people already know, was as complex as his music. Again, given the fact he grew up in a home where he was shuttled from mom's house, dad's house, music was his venue, was his muse, was his escape from reality. He also spent more time with his friends, writing music. He also didn't get along with his stepfather, from what I've read. So he moved in with his dad and then his friend Andre Simone. Sometimes they even shared a room, sometimes living in the basement. Even after Prince became famous, Prince stayed close to Minneapolis because those were his roots and he wanted to be close to his family and friends. He moved his dad into one of his homes and later built the famous, infamous Paisley Park studio. Now, Prince was a private person. He spent long time in his studio, sometimes coming out of all-night jam sessions. He rarely gave interviews. And that's one thing I noticed when I was researching Prince's history, is there's not much out there for interviews. And when I dug a little deeper, what I've noticed was that he basically kept a tight circle of friends. He was very cautious of who he gave interviews with. Not just any random Joe Schmo off the street would say, hey Prince, let me do an interview with you. Everything was methodically thought out. He only gave interviews with certain reputable sources. And basically, from what I've read, he also wanted up front to know what the questions were. And he wanted to know what he was getting himself into, which, truthfully, I don't blame him. So, rumors flew about wild parties at Paisley Park, periods of isolation, but Prince's life always revolved around music, his band, and giving back to his community. He loved Minnesota. He loved Minneapolis. He loved his community, and he always made it a point to give back to his community whenever he could. So, Prince, again, he was a complex person, extremely private. He was also known for being shy and introverted, and I know we covered the shyness earlier, but they also said that he was an introvert person and he was very much of a homebody. But then on the other aspect, I read about him being very demanding, obsessive. He had an obsessive work ethic. He was he had a sharp, flamboyant stage persona. Prince was just a musical perfectionist. We all want to be perfect. We all want to be a perfectionist in our trade and our skill and what we're good at. And that's what Prince did. So I don't see anything wrong with that. And I know we're all entitled to our opinions, and that's true. I agree with that. But I didn't think there was anything wrong with what Prince did, with how Prince was. Music was everything to him. I mean, it wasn't, he had his family, he had his friends, he gave back to the community, but music was his everything. So he maintained strict boundaries, and he was very protective of his privacy. So he was extremely private, to the point where some people thought maybe he may have been snobbish or standoffish. And he's not. He's just very protective of himself, and he just wanted to make sure that he didn't offend anyone, or he wanted to make sure that what he did on his time was private. He didn't want everyone to know every single detail of his life. And honestly, I don't blame him. If I were a celebrity, I would be so private. I know how the way things are, even back then when Prince was still around compared to now, regardless of the situation, I would want to be private. I don't want people to know do you mean every little detail? Would you want someone to know every single minute of your life? When you're in your studio, when you're sleeping, when you're in the bathroom? I mean, come on. I don't blame him. But along my journey of this research on Prince, I found out some key traits, key information that, I don't know, maybe some people may have known, but I haven't known about. Other than the perfectionist and being a workaholic, he was mischievous. He had a mischievous, playful side to him. He was a prankster, and sometimes he would like to bike naked and show up unannounced at friends' homes, revealing a very less serious side of him. So that's nice to know that at least he's got that side of him. And riding his bike naked, wow, that is interesting. Not something I would ever do, but, hey, I think that's great, You got to have some fun. I mean, life is, it's great to be a serious artist and to love what you're doing, but you need to take time and have fun And as they say, take time and smell the roses. Anyways, let's continue on. Prince was also, I think everyone knows this, he was also business savvy. He was a smart businessman. He knew his numbers. He knew what he made. He knew what his expenses were. He basically navigated his career, and he was controlled every aspect of his finances. Sometimes he would clash with collaborators because, they would have an agreement, and if it didn't go as planned, he was very methodical with his finances, and he made sure that in the process, he wasn't getting screwed and that he didn't mess up someone else. And he was also, on another note, in a religious side, he was very spiritual. He did convert to Jehovah's Witness, so he became more of an outwardly religious person. Even going door to door added another layer to his complex identity. He was very deep in his religious and his faith, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. I think I commend him for that, actually. Few people knew of all of his sides of how he was, but he was this persona who was shy. He was an introvert, but at the same time he was a prankster, and he loved to show up uninvited at friends' homes. There's many facets to people. We all have many facets of ourselves, and Prince is no exception to that. And I love the fact that, for me, I love the fact that he was a workaholic. That can drain you at times, but look at the hits that he produced. We wouldn't have those hits if he wasn't a workaholic. And today's music, when I say today's music, I don't mean just in the 2020s, the 2010s, the 2000s, the 1990s, all of that, all those musicians, all those music and genres of music, top 10, top 40 radios, music charts, a lot of that stuff, a lot of the music we've heard over the past couple of decades was not possible without Prince. And again, I'm not just saying solely Prince. There are other musicians that contributed to that, but we wouldn't have the music we have today without the artists of the past. And that's just my take on it. So we're going to touch briefly on his albums. He's written so many albums. He's released like 39 albums, over 900 songs in his career, covering almost every music genre possible. But we're going to go over the ones from the 1970s and 80s. So 1978, he released his first album called For You. On this album, Prince played every instrument and sang every note. No lip syncing, no backup musician, on the drums or the guitar. No, he played every instrument and sang every note. The album showed his talent, and it showed what he basically said, "Hey world, here I am." But unfortunately, the album didn't sell well. Again, he just released his first album. He's trying to make a name for himself, so that's understandable. Now, in 1979, he came out with his second album called Prince. His second album he showed more confidence in this album. He had that song called I Want to Be Your Lover, and then there were a few other hits with that as well. And he also showed off his falsetto, his falsetto tones, and his skills. And, again, telling everyone, here I am, this is what I can do. 1980 was more of a risque album called Dirty Mind. Very bold, very funky. There were several tracks on there that were released that did somewhat well, but that was more of a edgier side to him, to let people know, hey, I'm not just about flowers and this, I have an edgy side of as well. 1981, Controversy. I love that album. That is my favorite album. I just love it. This album was tackled more about politics and identity. Controversy was one of the songs. I like it. It's one of my favorite songs from Prince. It kind of got him more established within the music industry. 1999, which was released in 1982, was the best. That was one of my favorites as well. It was synth sounds. 1999 was considered, even to this day, is still a party theme. Little Red Corvette had some new wave pop funk fusion. The album reached a wider audience, and it made Prince a bona fide pop star. Now, 1999, I remember when I first heard the song, I was probably like 7 at the time, 7, 6, 7, more like 7, 8 actually. And I remember with my friends sitting around, we would listen to the record, and we would just be like, wow, imagine in the year 1999 what it'll be like. Because, when you're a kid in 1999, you think like the Jetsons, like cars flying in space, and, it's fun. But anyways, I just had to put that in there. Onward, Purple Rain, 1984. Now, this album he produced this with Prince and the Revolutions, and Prince's career just skyrocketed. It took off, it exploded. The album and the movie, Purple Rain, were huge hits. When Doves Cry, Let's Go Crazy, they all became classics, as well as Purple Rain. The album, from what I've gathered from my research, and I might not be exactly correct, but from what I've gathered, he sold over 18 million copies of that album, and it was number 1 for 6 months. To this day, I will crank those songs up if I hear it in the car and I'm driving. I will crank that all the way up, and I will blast that out of my windows. I don't care who's listening. I'm a Gen Xer. I love that stuff. I grew up to that stuff. Anyways, carrying on. 1985, Around the World in a Day. This was more of a different type of genre for Prince. He finagled with some new sounds, blended some psychedelic and even some Middle Eastern tones. Raspberry Beret, Pop Life, those were hits from that came from that album, and those were really good hits. I liked how Prince, started out. It wasn't doing, he was starting out. He hit big, skyrocketed, and then he stayed up there, and he just kind of, tried a different music genre, and I love that. I love when artists don't just stick to one genre. They think outside the box, and they try other sounds. I love that. And then in 1986 was the album Parade. That was the soundtrack for Under the Cherry Moon, which I've never seen that movie, but I've heard it's really good. I need to make a note for myself to see that one. The song Kiss came out of that. That was a nice little funky hit with his signature falsetto voice, which I love. Also, Mountains was another one of my favorites, and Girls and Boys. The album did do well. That was actually a really good album. It did very well in the charts as well. And then we have 1987, Sign O' the Times. So at this point, the Revolutions broke up. Prince released, it was a double album. The track Sign of the Times basically dealt with social issues in songs like You Got the Look, and that song, I think Sheena Easton was on that song with him, and If I Was Your Girlfriend. So the album was praised as a masterpiece. It was one of his really good albums since Purple Rain. So that covered from the 70s over to the 80s. I'm not going to continue on with the other albums he's produced, but I mean, you get the gist of it. I mean, he's a music legend. I mean, to cover what he's done, and it's just, there's just no words for it. But I did want to touch briefly on the Minneapolis sound, just because Prince incorporated that in his music. And again, I'm going to have another podcast devoted to that. So I just want to give you like a brief synopsis of what the Minneapolis sound really is. It's a mix of funk, rock, synth pop, and it was Prince created that, as well as other local musicians at the time. Instead of horns, they would use synth pop drum machines. Then basically the drum machines replaced actual drummers it was basically, the sound came from Minneapolis, from the Minneapolis music scene. Musicians, The Time, Vanity Six, Sheila E., they basically all contributed to this sound. Bass lines were tight, funky guitars, guitar solos, aggressive drum tracks. It was basically like punk, rock guitar, new wave, pop hooks. And again, we're going to cover this more when I discuss the Minneapolis sound in another podcast. But the Minneapolis sound was a bona fide success. And a lot of these artists created that sound. And it's the reason we have, again, some of the music that we have today. But on that note, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. And I hope everyone has a great evening or a great day wherever you are in the world watching this podcast. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is at Mistress Sweet P. So it's at MISTRESSSWEET-PEA on YouTube. And also, I'm on Facebook as well. Just look for me on Facebook as well, which is Mistress Sweet P. On that note, I hope everyone has a great night. I love you all. Please be kind to each other, and we will check you out on the flip side. Bye.